What is going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our weekly live stream. It's here on a Wednesday. I played a little golf today. Didn't really go my way. Was one of the more terrible rounds I've had, quite frankly, in my entire life. Had multiple hosel rockets, chunks all over the place. Just really didn't feel like myself out there. But we had a good time. We were with friends, so can never complain from that front. Now that we're back, rested and recuperated, got into the bourbon here a little bit. So we have a little bit here on the side to sip on while we're here. And something I figured we'd do here is just to show what we're sipping on, right? So this is Kentucky Owl. If you guys have seen it before, sorry, I'll try to get it actually in the frame there. It's really good. It's definitely got a little bit of bite to it, a lot of spices, aromatics definitely going on there. But, what you want in a good old bourbon. So again, everyone out there, hopefully you're having a good Wednesday night, and can't wait to break down this President's Cup. And that's sort of whiskey, just to give you an idea. This Kentucky Owl that we're drinking is a little bit of higher shelf sort of bourbon. Don't really want to put ice cubes in it, that sort of thing, because it'll actually dilute it. It'll take away some of its taste. And like any connoisseur out there, you want to have the real thing. So that's what we're going with there. Definitely a little bit more bite to it because we don't have the ice in it. But let's get on into this thing. So I think the best way to take this down, because what has changed over the last 3 hours are that we know the pairings. And throughout the week, there was a lot of speculation about who the groups were going to be. On the American side, it was a lot more predictable than what we had on the international side. But even taking a look at the balls that players were using, relationships between players like you have with the JT and somebody like a Jordan Spieth, or Sam Burns and Scotty Scheffler, who I had my eye on. I thought they might end up being a pairing. Or over here with Tom Kim and KH Lee. Apparently, they're getting along very well. They use the same exact sort of golf ball. So this morning, as I was going in through some of that analysis, it became pretty clear to me that those sort of players would be matched up. We knew about these three matchups. They're with Cantlay and Xander. We knew Jordan Spieth and JT would be a thing. I also kind of locked in that Scott Scheffler and Burns matchup. The Morikawa and Young took me a little bit off guard. I wasn't really expecting that. I knew Morikawa was going to be matched up with someone at random. I thought it might have been Tony Finau. It could have been a Max Homa. I thought that was a possibility, or even a Cam Young. I just didn't know who it was going to be. So with the other two players that were left out there, that's where we got Tony Finau and Max Homa. So it makes sense. I can see where the groups came together there. But definitely the two groups that I think are the weakest, it might get the most broken up on the American side, would be the Morikawa Young and then the Finau and Homa group. On the international side, I wouldn't trust anything. All of these groups could be broken up. You have guys that are starting here in the first slate, like a Siwoo Kim, for example. I'd probably put Mito and KH Lee into the same sort of bucket here, where I wouldn't be surprised if they play 2, maybe 3 slates at the very most over the next 4 days. You have guys like Adam Scott, Hideki Matsuyama that I'm expecting to play on every single slate possible. Same thing with Sungjae Im and Corey Connors. So don't expect them to be paired up for all 4 slates. I very well expect them to get broken up. You can see Adam Scott paired with somebody like Cam Davis. I think putting the 2 countrymen together would make a lot of sense. And then taking Corey Connors and putting it with Pendrith, like you've seen in all the practice rounds this week, would also make quite a bit of sense. So just because the groups are what they are, don't trust them for the international side. I think you're going to see a lot of consistency and a lot of the same groups for the Americans over the next 3-4 days. But for the international side, I think it's going to be an absolute clusterfuck. And excuse my language there, but that's really the best word I could use for it. It's going to be absolute madness. In terms of future groups, we talked about the Scott Davis group. This Im Kim group, I also could be a thing. So Sungjae and Tom Kim, both of them also play the same ball. So there was a lot of speculation because they, are really close going into it that they would end up being in the same group, and also because they played the same ball. So don't ignore that. That could be a thing in the future. You can see KH Lee and Siwoo played together. They play a lot of practice rounds together on tour. So not just here at the President's Cup where they've done it throughout the week. They're also relatively close. And Mito Pereira, you could see him matched up with pretty much anybody. With that ball striking ability, what's to say that him and a Corey Connors or him and Hideki are going to be a group? So you could see a lot of mixing, matching here. Obviously Kisner and Horschel were the 2 left out for the American side that aren't getting any playing time. And then for the other side, you had Munoz and who was the other one? Bizanehout, who are not playing for the first slate. So those are the pairings. In terms of the matchups, I think that the first match is going to be competitive, but Cantlay and Xander are going to win. I think that it's more like a 65-35 sort of matchup. Jordan Spieth, JT versus Im and Connors, that is going to be extremely close. In fact, I mean, JT and Spieth are the favorites there, and I have to bet on them. They're literally my number 1 and 2 favorite players on tour. So on Prize Picks, I picked them for the first round. But if I was doing this analytically, I would pick Sungjae and Corey Connors. So it's like betting against the Steelers. Literally, my favorite 2 players on tour, I'm not going to bet against them. But the numbers say that Im and Connors have a really good chance. So when I'm playing DFS, don't get me wrong, I'm going to have a ton of this Im Connor stack. So we're going to talk about stacks here in a second too. I just want to talk through the matchups before we talk about the actual DFS side. This next matchup, I think, could very well go the internationals way. I would say that Morikawa and Young are favorites once again, just like this JT Spieth matchup. But it's a lot closer than I think a lot of people give it credit for. On Prize Picks, they had this as a 2.5 point spread. So essentially, Morikawa and Young had to win by 3 or more holes to end up taking home the championship there. I slammed the under on that immediately, and now it's down to 2 holes. So, 2 points. So you can see that obviously there's been a little bit of line action there. But among all of the opening lines on Draftkings, this was the closest line. So to see that sort of thing on Prize Picks was definitely surprising to me, and why I played it in so many lines. So it's close. They could pull the upset there. And if Tom Kim and KH Lee, that chemistry is real between those 2 players, watch out. They could be a super team, a team that ends up playing most of the slate. So I like those 2. Scotty Scheffler and Burns, I think they're going to be a super team. I called it going into the week. I thought that they would be matched up pretty much no matter what. I thought there was maybe possibility that Scheffler, might be matched up with somebody else, and then Burns would be with Horschel. But who wants Billy Horschel to start when you have all of these guys in your starting lineup, right? No shit, right? Even Cam Young, Colin Morikawa, I'd much rather have them than Billy Ho. And again, that's no diss to Billy Ho. It's more of a, credit to how good the rest of these players are. So it's a no doubter that these 10 players for America were ended up starting even for alternate shot. And for best ball, I think it's going to be 8, at least 8 of them, right? Because obviously only 2 people can sub in. You're going to have to play Horschel and Kisner for a few of the slates. But I think it's going to be most of these guys for all 3 days. I think they're going to run with their top end guys. Even if the pairings change, let's say that Finau, Homa, and Morikawa Young both end up losing. Because again, I think that this matchup could be relatively close. We haven't touched on the last matchup yet. If they both end up losing, you could see a mixing and matching done there, right? Where they take maybe Finau, put them with Morikawa, put Young with Homa. Any sort of combination between those 4 players would make more than enough sense too. I don't think that they're just going to go complete wholesale changes for the next alternate shot format and bring in Billy or bring in Kevin Kisner, because they're by far the shortest players on the team. Even Morikawa can still get it out there, at least like above average in terms of his driving distance. Both of those players are at least average, right? If not a little bit worse than that for somebody like a Kevin Kisner. But yeah, I love the Scheffler Burns group. I think that they're going to stay together for most of the week. And unfortunately for Cam Davis and Siwoo Kim, I understand why Trevor Immelman picked them. So they're like the ultimate volatility group. If they both end up on their games, they can beat anybody. Hell, honestly, if I was Trevor Immelman and I was going second, so he had the first pick, he put out Scott and Matsuyama to start. And then the United States answered with somebody like a Scheffler and Schauffele and Cantlay. If he was able to just go second, so first was Schauffele and then Cantlay up there, I might have answered with Kim and Davis, because they're so volatile that, when they're on their game, they can beat Cantlay and Schauffele, who are like a super team for the United States. So I understand why he put the team together. So maybe they'll have success. More than likely, they will not. More than likely, they will suck, and they're going to lose pretty handedly to Scheffler and Burns. So believe it or not, they also had a 2.5 point spread, just like this Morikawa Young match. But I took the over on Scheffler and Burns because I think they're going to absolutely roast them more often than not. So that's my take there. But don't ignore it. I'll say I'm playing them in the Lordsville GPP because, first off, they're both relatively low owned, particularly Siwoo Kim, and they have that volatility. They have that outcome in them. They're more than capable of running off, winning a match play sort of format. But again, most outcomes are going to favor the Americans there. And lastly, I think that this is also going to be a relatively close match, kind of like the third one. So I think the last, let's say the second, third, and then the fifth match are the ones that are most likely to be close. I think that the Cantlay-Xander pairing is just going to beat up on these old guys. Good Hideki with a bad back. I don't think they're going to put up a fight. And then I think the Siwoo Kim-Cam Davis match is probably going to be an absolute barn burner. I mean, sorry, opposite of a barn burner. I don't think it'll be close. I think it'll be an absolute just demolishing out there for the American side. These other three matches might be close, though. And that's because the two ball striking phenoms and Pendrith and Mito Pereira, I mean, we know they're going to go out there just pin seeking on almost every single hole. They're both extremely streaky putters. So kind of similar. You could put a Mito Pereira and a Cam Davis together, and they'd have that similar level of volatility. I mean, Siwoo Kim's also in that picture, right? So any combination of those three players, and you'd get that same sort of group like you have there in match 4. But here in match 5, Pendrith, I think he's just a much better player than those other three guys. So he kind of elevates that sort of grouping, which I think could make this a little bit closer, particularly because Tony Finau doesn't have the best match play record. In Max Homa, he's been okay in match play, but doesn't have very much experience. Kind of similar to a Cam Young, who I think that might be a little bit troublesome for him at first. I think he might not be as smooth as you're hoping. So those are the pairings. What we're going to do now is hop into the player poll. And I realized I made a boo-boo, but it is what it is. We're going to live with it here on stream. I did not make a stream version, so all of the projections are going to be up, unfortunately. But again, it is what it is. Let's catch up on chat, see what's going on. We have Mark who says, hey, Luke, what do you think about a cheap international captain that you think plays all the matches and then stacking the lineup with the American studs in a one-entry contest? So I think that that'll be slightly more unique than going with a 4-2. So going out there, taking 4 Americans and then a stack of the 2 international players playing together for the first slate. That's going to be by far the most common build. And yeah, we're going to talk about the DFS builds here in a second. I think that makes sense. It's a way to get a little bit contrarian and dependent on which Americans that you take. And if you leave salary on the table, it could work for a large field contest too. But you're in a single entry. You don't have to worry about duplicating yourself nearly as much. So just by getting to that 5-1 sort of setup, that's probably enough there. So yeah, Mark, I like how you're thinking there. And the international captain, I'm definitely going to have my exposure to, but I do like the American captains more. So we haven't talked about the strategy yet. We'll get there here in a second. That'll be one of the talking points for sure. Jack says Tom Kim to be the top international point scorer. You think he's 7-1 at Circa. So I think that's reasonable. I think he'll play at least 4 slates. Given that he's young, he can get on streaks. We've seen that. I mean, at the Wyndham, he looked absolutely unbelievable. I think that it's definitely within his range of outcomes, especially if you're just looking at the international team. I've actually seen him to be the outright scorer. Actually, people take that for the entire President's Cup, not just for the international side. I think that there's some value there, but again, you're taking something at 7-1, right? So just your expectations have to be there. He'll get the playing time, and if he gets hot, he'll get all 5 matches, right? If he goes out there, he starts 2-0, that sort of thing, he's going to get the run that you need to get there. I think you could do crazier things. So, Jack, I think you're onto something. On the American side, I do like getting into like some of the newer groups. So, like, I don't love that Morikawa Cam Young group. I don't love the Tony Finau Max Homa group. But in terms of value, that's where you're getting all the value in terms of top USA scores. So I like how you're thinking there with Tom Kim. He's kind of that equivalent on the international side. Chris says, so what do you think about players that are not in the first match? I hate them. Yeah, we're going to talk about that here in a second, Chris. I'm going to play this week just for pure EV, going for the best lineups. I mean, I'm playing in a GPP, right? I'm 150 maxing. So we're going to talk about my exposure because that's going to be important to think about when you're hearing my analysis, my advice that I'm giving you. But yeah, I hate those players. Yeah, we're going to talk about it. Unless you're just playing a pure lottery game, I don't think you should play them. Big Tech says, what's up? What's up? What's going on, dude? Hopefully you're doing well. Mark says, are you surprised that Ryan Fox was snubbed? I do. I think he should have been there on top of Zaynhoot. He could have been on the team and ahead of somebody like a Siwoo Kim, who wasn't necessarily in good form over the last few months. So yes, I'm surprised that he was snubbed. And there was a few other people that I thought were deserving of at least getting some attention. He talked about a few of them on the broadcast, actually, when they mentioned like, oh, this guy might be worth a few looks for the President's Cup. Like Mackenzie Hughes, for example, he wasn't in good form, right? So that's why he wasn't selected. But why select Siwoo Kim? He's in that same stretch of form, right? He's missing a bunch of cuts, posting like 30th, 50th place finishes when he makes the cut. Yeah, I was surprised, particularly because Ryan Fox is in pretty decent form. Nick says USA, USA, you gotta love it. That'll be me tomorrow morning. So yeah, we're gonna talk about my exposure, but I'm going to be more of a fan than anything this week. I'm taking a lot of USA players. I'm playing a lot of JT and Jordan Spieth, and you'll hear my reasons why in a second. And the Peach says, love the 2 to 3 max pool. You and your fellow non-MME players. Yeah, for a week like this, I felt like it was necessary. So yeah, guys, by the way, normally I don't give away all my projections. I'll just say that. Normally they're on my Patreon page. So if you like what you're seeing here, join my Patreon. You can get access to everything you're looking at. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm pretty sure I might be one of the only sites that has ownership for this week. So in terms of projected ownership at the flex spot and the captain spot, I pretty much had to take my NFL algorithm, what I do for ownership over there, import my golf algorithm and like blend them to make it work, because the projections for it are the same exact thing as we do for an NFL slate, like what I do for Showdown, like 3-4 days a week, except that I can't just run the golf projections through the NFL one, right? Because it accounts for game total, a lot of things that you don't account for in golf. So I had to really, really tune it up and do that this week. So, I looked around the industry, a few other sites that I like to cross-reference with, and none of them had ownership. Do they just take this week off, think that it doesn't matter? I mean, at the end of the day, you can do it by hand if you need to, but, these companies should have the sort of salary, should have this type of budget to go out there and hire a programmer to go out there and fix it. Especially if somebody like me, who I'm not like an amateur programmer, I went to school for it. I'm an electrical engineer, computer engineer by trade. If I can do it and I'm not like a high level programmer, they should be able to hire someone to do it on budget. That's my take on it. And again, I subscribe to those sites and I use them to cross reference a lot of my ownership, and they didn't even have it this week. It seems pretty lazy to me. But again, I don't like to bitch about other sites all too much, but that's the truth out there. And there's people that are so on experts at this that do their own ownership. If you're doing so, it shouldn't be that difficult. You should be able to produce ownership this week. That's my take on it. It wasn't that difficult for me. It took me about 2 hours. I still played golf today and coded my ownership algorithm today. Those guys probably weren't playing golf, and they had all day to do it, and they didn't. What's that say about them? Anyways, I'm done bitching about them. That's my take on it. Anyways, at the top of the board, let's talk about just like the overall strategy here. So, first off, my exposure, and then we're going to get into this types of rules that I'm setting, the pool, the players that I'm excluding, all of those sort of things, because it's going to dictate everything. I mean, from a like player by player standpoint, I'm not going to have much to talk about here. What we talk about for the next 5 to 10 minutes, maybe even longer, if we get questions. By the way, if you have strategy questions, this is the perfect time for it. This is by far the most important part of the stream. So if you're going to watch anything over the next half an hour to an hour, it's the next 10, 15 minutes. This is what you want to be here for. So I'm playing 150 lineups. I'm playing in the 50-cent GPP. I typically play $5 GPPs, right? So $750 for my MME. I'm playing lower volume this week because this is volatile as all hell. I don't want to have a week this week, where, I'm hitting a lower 20th percentile performance, which might be getting like $50 back on 750, just because it's a volatile week, right? And you could argue that is advantageous if you're a shitty DFS player. Weeks with a lot of randomness are good if you don't normally have an edge with PGA DFS. That's not the case with me. I'm pretty comfortable playing week to week, right? I make pretty solid ROI, particularly when it comes to some of my single entries and 2 to 3 maxes. Now, for a GPP, if it's already volatile, then you're giving me this cup style format. I mean, just no thank you. So first off, I'm playing lower dollar this week. I would recommend, and again, this is just my personal recommendation. You can do whatever the hell you want. It's your money. If you have money to spend, by all means, go ahead and spend it. But whatever you spend week to week in terms of your DFS, I'd probably tone it back this week. That's just a personal recommendation with the volatility that's out there. With that being said, I'm playing 150 lineups, but I'm going completely for ROI. So you might think because I'm only playing $75 that I might be a little bit more risky, a little bit more volatile, right? Try to go for first place. But that's a fool's errand. To try and get the perfect combination for these large field GPPs is nearly impossible. In fact, when you compared the winning lineups in a lot of the GPPs for the Ryder Cup there last year, they were 40, 50 points off the optimal lineup. So in terms of a GPP winning lineup, it's not going to be anywhere close to the optimal this week. And normally in large field GPPs, that's the case week to week. I mean, sometimes if a lot of the chalk hits, the actual winning lineup might be a little bit closer to the optimal lineup. But at this format, at least for the Ryder Cup, it was comically different. So don't expect to have to go out there and hit the absolute nuts, even in like a 10 to 50,000 entry GPP. And what that, leads me to is just making optimal lineups. And what do I mean by an optimal lineup? And this is really what we're going to touch on for the next 10 minutes here, are the type of rules that you want to set. When we look at the matchup list, I'm going to stack like crazy. I'm going to take players on the American side because I think that they win this in handed fashion. So first off, you got to run with a game script, right? So it's like a showdown slate. That's how we're going to do this, okay? I expect America to kick ass, right? Win by like 7 to 8 points. If you're an international supporter out there, I'm sorry, but you're about to get your ass whooped this week. That's not even like an American kind of thing saying that. That's just facts. Y'all are like minus 700 underdogs, right? You don't really have that much hope. Data Golf's giving you a 30% chance to win, but that's about the best hope that you have around the industry at this point. I'm going to take a lot of the Americans, and I'm going to stack them in at least 4 of them in every lineup that I'm going with. And if I'm playing somebody like a Justin Thomas, I'm for sure going to play a Jordan Spieth. If I'm playing a Scotty Scheffler, I'm for sure going to play a Sam Burns. But if I'm playing a Sam Burns, I'm not for sure going to play a Scotty Scheffler. If I'm playing Jordan Spieth, I'm not for sure going to play Justin Thomas. Do you guys understand why that would be the case? And if not, I'll walk you through it. If you're taking the guy that's more expensive, you should always have a rule that you automatically have the cheaper guy, because if you're going to go with it, you might as well go with the stack. Whereas if you're taking a Jordan Spieth and maybe going as a one-off, trying to stack 2 of the other American groups, for example, or maybe just one of them going with 1 stack and then 2 one-offs on the American side, that's more than viable to get to the large field winning lineup, not the optimal lineup, the large field winning lineup. You might want to take Jordan Spieth on his own, right? But I wouldn't take Justin Thomas on his own, because why would you take the more expensive player of the pairing that we know is going to play pretty much 4 out of the 4 slates that they can? Why would we take the more expensive version, right? Why would we take the more expensive version of Scotty Scheffler between him and Sam Burns, who I think you're going to play together for all 4 rounds? It just wouldn't make sense. So I'm going to have rules set that if I'm taking the more expensive of the 2 players, that I have to take the least expensive guy on that team. And in terms of my projections, you can see that these American guys are projecting well above their international counterparts. I mean, Sam Burns is like nearly 10 points higher than Hideki there. I have Tony Finau at 90 points, Max Homa, Justin Thomas. Just these are the sort of players that you're trying to jam into lineups. So that's the thought process in terms of stacking. If I'm taking the more expensive player, I'm going to take the guy that's least expensive. In terms of the international side, now, if you weren't here at the beginning of the stream, I mentioned that I think that their groups aren't going to be nearly as set in stone. So I know that Hideki and Scott are playing together in the first round. I'm not going to be nearly as worried about stacking them because, again, I'm going with at least 4 Americans in every single lineup. And if I'm going with at least 4 Americans, that means we have at most, right, 2 international players. So I'm not just going to take like this Adam Scott Hideki stack. Like if they get trounced in round 1, like I really think is possibly the case, maybe I just want to take Tom Kim, who's a lot cheaper at $5,600, and maybe KH Lee, right? I know that's a stack there, so maybe that's not the best example, but maybe it's a Taylor Pendrith and a Tom Kim. Taking 2 players that are cumulatively less than $10,000 together is going to open you up to spend right around $10K for your other 4 spots. So let's say you're taking somebody like Cam Young at captain, right? He's $9,900. You could live in the 10K range. We could take Max Homa, Justin Thomas, Xander, and Patrick Cantlay together, right? So you'd have the 1 stack on the American side, which probably one of them you'd want to be the captain. So by the way, yeah, we're going to talk about the whole captain position here in a second. But getting to that sort of build is how I imagine going about it, right? And in this one, if you're going to play Captain Cam Young, maybe you want to play him with Colin Morikawa, right? So we're going to talk about the captain position. So anyone that you're captaining, I don't think that this has to be a steadfast role, but in my 150 max, it's going to be. Anyone that I'm playing at captain on the American side, I'm going to for sure play their counterpart. And I'm only going to play the captains that are cheaper on the American side. So Scotty Scheffler, Patrick Cantlay, Justin Thomas, Max Homa, and that's it for the American side, those players. I'm for sure not going to use it captain, right? So if I have somebody like, let's say a Jordan Spieth, for example, who's the other cheapies? I guess Corey Connor. I mean, Cam Young's technically cheaper than Colin Morikawa, but again, I don't think he really fits into that description. But somebody like Sam Burns, for example, Jordan Spieth that we talked about, those sort of players, if I have them at captain, I'm for sure going to have the other player in my lineup. So I know it's a lot, guys, right? But essentially, you stack where you can, especially for the American side. I think that's the side that you want to stack. I don't think you have to do a 2-on-2 stack where you take 2 American teams together and then maybe 2 internationals, or even 2 American teams and then 1 extra American and then 1 international team member. I don't think you have to be that crazy about it, right? I think that it would make a lot of sense to, and by the way, you have to play at least 1 international team player. That's something that a lot of people forget about when they go to make their lineups. You have to have at least 1 in your lineups. And I think that you want to stick to the ones that we know are going to play, which for me, and again, I'm not really using them in stacks here, are Hideki Matsuyama, it's Corey Connors, it's Adam Scott, and there's one more. Tom Kim is like an extra one. I would kind of count Tom Kim and Sungjae Im. So those 4 or 5 players there for the international team are going to get pretty much all of the playing time. And when I'm going with a 4-2 stack or a 5-1 stack, like I'll be doing with all of my 150 lineups, I'm going to be playing at least 2 or 1 of those players, and not necessarily the 2 that are playing together, like a Hideki and Adam Scott, or trying to get to, a Sungjae or Corey Connors together. I'd be perfectly fine taking Hideki Matsuyama and getting a Corey Connors in that same lineup, right? That's, I think, more than viable, because I don't think that those groups are going to be set in stone. You can have ones that win on Sunday, one that is in a pair that loses on Sunday, that sort of thing. And given the fact that Hideki is a lot more expensive, right? He's got a lot of opportunity cost involved with getting to him. Whereas a Tom Kim, I mean, if you want to take a shot on guys like a Cam Davis, or, I personally won't be getting to him myself, but Mito, Taylor Pendrith, Lee, for example, these sort of players, I think it makes sense at the end of the day. So let's catch up with chat, see what's going on. There should be a lot of questions. That was a lot to talk about. It's easier when I'm just going and setting rules, right? I'm playing 150 lineups, right? So I just have to think about them one at a time. But when I'm bringing them to you guys here on stream, it can be quite a bit to talk about. We have Mark, who says, do you think Lee could play all of the matches? If not, who do you like down low? I don't think he will. Unless him and Tom Kim are just electric, go out there, win by like 4 or 5 day 1, go out there day 2, back it up. I'm not sure I end up seeing that happen. So I think he probably plays like 3, 4 of the first 4 slates. Could end up going to all 4, but I think that's probably a little bit far-fetched. But even if he just plays 3 of the first 4, and then there on Sunday gets his 4th match there with his singles match, that's not the worst outcome at $4,200. That could still get to the optimal lineup. So don't think with the international guys, particularly if you're playing 150 lineups, if you're playing 50, 75 lineups, whatever the case may be this week, where you're getting a large enough sample size, don't feel bad to go to some of these cheap players that might not play all 5 slates. Because like Mito, for example, I'm not really sold that he's going to play every slate. Taylor Pendrith, I'm not sold that he's going to play every slate. But, Tom Kim might. I think that he's got a much better chance than Lee. Adam Scott, Corey Connors, Sungjae, Hideki, you get the point there. Chris says, so with the cup format, what if a player only plays, let's say, 2 or 3 matches? Wouldn't that just be a dumb pick? Exactly. So what you're doing here, right, is, and you can see in my GBP poll, right, like the guys that aren't playing in day 1, I'm not getting to, right? Siwoo Kim, Cam Davis, I don't think they're going to play 5 or maybe even 4 matches, right? So like I'm not playing them in my player pool. The guys that I have down as a yes are guys that I'm confident are going to play at least 4 matches, right? And the only 3 that I can say might not play 4 matches are Mito, Pendrith, and Lee. I think they're the wild cards there. Everybody from Tom Kim up that's in my player pool is going to play 4 matches. I mean, barring an injury, barring them just looking like complete dog shit out there, right? Like some crazy outcome that's more than likely not going to happen. These guys are going to get the playing time. And that's why I'm stacking them. So I mentioned that at the beginning, right? I'm lowering my exposure this week, and I'm just going for pure ROI. Building optimal lineups, which involves stacking, which we talked about there a little bit, and then just taking the players that are playing. The other half of stacking now, so we talked about just who we're going to take, right? Focusing on the guys that are playing on day 1. We talked about some of the stacks, trying to get teams together. Now let's talk about not playing against each other. So we know who's playing against each other in day 1. If I'm playing a stack, I will not play the people going against them day 1. So That's a little bit harder to set. I can do it in my personal optimizer. I can't do it on like some of the ones I have online. So a lot of the ones that you have access to. But if possible, when you're hand building, especially if you're hand building, you'll be able to control this. Don't play anybody as a run back against a stack. So, for example, if you're playing Scotty Scheffler and Sam Burns, and they're going up, day one against Cam Davis and Siwoo Kim, don't play Cam Davis. Don't play Siwoo Kim. Especially don't play them together, right? So if you can avoid that, by all means, I would recommend it. Now, the 4 players that I think you might want to exclude from that are Adam Scott, Hideki Matsuyama, Sungjae Im, and Corey Connors, because I think if they lose the first match, that might actually be good for them. They may actually get a little bit shuffled up there. I mentioned Adam Scott, Cam Davis might be a group. Might have Hideki and like Mito, or Hideki and Pendrith be a group. Sungjae Im and Tom Kim are almost certainly going to be a group at some point this week. Or Corey Connors and Taylor Pendrith are almost certainly to be a group at some point this week. Don't feel like those 4 international players, you have to worry about it nearly as much. But if you're stacking, let's say, Cantlay and Xander Schauffele, you don't want to play Adam Scott and Hideki Matsuyama together. You don't want to run it back against the opposite team, right? And again, with the international side, just for the 3rd time now, just to reiterate this, I'm not as worried about stacking. On the American side, it's almost like a steadfast rule, right? If I'm taking like one of the elite tier options, I'm stacking the guy that's cheaper than him, literally every single time, especially if it's somebody like a Cantlay, Scotty Scheffler example that are really expensive. I'm definitely going to take the guys less expensive on the team. On the international side, it's not nearly as important to me. Let's see. Michael says, I think it'll be a USA route. I do think it will. So you're playing the final score 21-9 at 18-1. So 21.5 to 8.5 is 20-1, and 22. Okay. Yeah, honestly, I think you could scattershot that, right? So if you wanted to bet all of those lines, just lower intervals in terms of your units, I think that would make sense, Michael. But yeah, I think that there's not one that I like specifically. I do think that it'll be a route. So maybe spread betting that would make a little sense there. Does Immelman have Tom Kim on a short leash? Like if he plays bad the first day, will he sit? I mean, that's a possibility, right? We aren't inside, Immelman's brain, so we aren't able to tell exactly. You would imagine that he probably has a short leash. You would imagine that he probably has a lot of potential there too. The one thing I'll say about Tom Kim is he speaks like 6 languages. So he speaks Korean, he speaks English, he speaks Japanese, and that's all of the languages of the team. He can speak to every player on the team, right? So he has a full fluent, no language barrier between him and anyone on the team, which for the international squad's a big deal, right? Siwoo Kim can speak English. That's fine, right? Cam Davis can speak English. Mito's got solid English, we'll say. He's like pretty much fluent. Just kind of it's not 100%. Let's say he's like 98% fluent. Pendrith's fluent, obviously. KH Lee's not. KH Lee's he's got like 60% English, we'll say, in terms of fluency, but he's getting there. He's getting a lot better. Sebastian Munoz obviously can speak English, but chooses to speak Spanish. He's like the one guy, by the way, guys, Munoz, I'm not trying to pick on him here, right? He can speak English, but I feel like he's just not going to play. Like, I feel like he might play like one slate before he has to again on Sunday. That's the minimum, by the way. Everyone has to play at least one slate. So Seabez is going to play at least once before Sunday. You're going to have Kisner get in there. I imagine Horschel will probably play with Sam Burns at some point. All of that is going to matter. And by the way, if Sam Burns ends up playing with, Horschel on the day that he has to play, maybe Scheffler ends up taking a break, right? Getting a day off. Like, that's a possibility. Just because I'm playing these guys up top, particularly the Americans, doesn't mean they're going to play all 5 slates. If anything, the Americans over the last 5 team play events have shown an ability not to play all 5 slates. They've given people a lot of time off. And the last time they played the Ryder Cup, only DJ played all 5, and he went 5-0. There was a reason why he played all 5, right? He was on absolute fire. So don't be surprised if that happens. Or even Patrick Cantlay and Xander Schauffele. I would say Cantlay is a little bit more likely to sit than a Xander Schauffele. You might see one of them rested. I mean, if Jordan Spieth is playing like dog shit, right, you might see him rested. Tom Kim has that same sort of outcome, right? If he starts a little bit shaky, it's not due to fatigue. It's just due to his ability, right? He might be benched for that sort of reason. That's always within the range of outcomes. And if you're going to play some of these like tertiary options, like a Sebastian Munoz, a Seabass, right, would be a great example there for the international team. Horschel or Kisner for the American side. You're having to hope that just someone comes completely off the rails, and it happens early, right? They're after the first round, rather than them being the bench person. Let's say, for example, like Sebastian Munoz, right? It ends up being somebody like a Taylor Pendrith who shoots like an 80, absolutely tanks their team to an alternate shot. Maybe Munoz goes out there in the second day, absolutely kills it with best ball, which he makes a ton of birdies, by the way, that's possible. He could steal the job. But it has to be a pretty extreme outcome, right? Where somebody really sucks and then Munoz comes in and really kills it to steal the show. And again, that's just so volatile. It's so hard to tell how the hell that's going to go down that I'm not going to bet it. I'm just going to take the players that are playing in the first round that aren't playing against the players that I'm stacking on my team and making that the role that I go with. It worked for me at the Ryder Cup. I won money on my large field GPP. I didn't win the large field GPP, but I won ROI wise. And given the fact that a lot of people are just going to enter lineups by hand, not think about any sort of strategy when they're entering their lineups, just by doing this alone, we're going to be at such an advantage over the rest of the field, right? By correlating our lineups, playing guys that we're expecting to play at least 4 or 5 matches, playing people that aren't, negatively correlated against each other for 20%, 25% of the matches. It's important. All of those things are going to add up to a sizable EV edge. And if you're playing 150 lineups and you're able to cover a ton of outcomes, I think that's the best way to handle the volatility, because this is going to be a crapshoot this week, right? We're going to have a lot of people that go off and do things that are unexpected. By putting, 150 different combinations out there, it gives us a better chance at covering them all. So that's the thoughts on the strategy side. And yeah, just to answer your question there, yeah, Tom Kim could definitely be pulled. That's well within his range of outcomes. In terms of the 2 to 3 max pull, it's pretty much my GPP pull, except I'm not playing the Morikawa Cam Young group. I think that might end up getting broken up there. And I'm not playing these really low end, like international guys like Amito Pereira, Taylor Pendrith, KH Lee. I'm going to stick to the proven commodities teams, or even players on the international team that I think you're going to play at least 4 slates, and just, go for it in that direction. I'm not going to be as bold, right? Because I think playing this Cam Young Morikawa group is going to be a little bit, lower owned than some of the players around them, but definitely comes at a lower projection. And then especially for these guys down here, right? They're projecting for like 64, 70 points if you're lucky for somebody like a Taylor Pendrith. And in a 20 or 2 to 3 max pull like we have right here, I think it might be a little bit too much to ask for. So that's what we've got from the player pool perspective. We're going to go over to Draftkings now, talk through one lineup build. So kind of how I'd go through and think through one of my single entry builds. And then afterwards, we're going to go to Prize Picks. So actually, let me stop sharing this, bring up Prize Picks, and then I'll share it. I guess we'll talk about the matchups they have up there. Because, there's only 5 props on the board, so it'll be easy to go through it, but we'll touch on all the Prize Pick stuff too. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. We'll go to DraftKings to begin. And this is assuming that I'm going with like a single entry. Now, this won't be my single entry this week, but this is the type of thought process that I'd be going through. So I want to be a little bit cheaper at captain if I can. In my large field 150 max, I'm definitely going to have like a Cantlay at captain, a Scotty Scheffler, for example. But in a 2 to 3 max where I'm trying to get a higher median projection, I'm going to try and get a little bit cheaper about it. So let's go ahead and take an American captain. A lot of people have been talking about international captains, which I understand. They're going to be lower owned. I don't want to say that ownership is like non-existent to me this week. It matters, but it's not nearly as important as most weeks. I mean, pretty much everybody's chalk. A lot of the low-owned plays are low-owned for a reason, because they're probably not going to play all that much over the next few weekends. It's a lot more about correlation and stacking than it is about going out there and trying to be unique this week. That's it. That's at least my opinion on it. And if you're going to chop first place this week, so be it. When you only have 24 players in the player pool, it's a lot easier to duplicate yourself with other people, right? So, going crazy and obsessing over trying to make your lineup unique this week, I think it's just going to put you in a super negative EV situation. So that's why I'm not worrying about it all that much, because I think it's just going to take you off of really how to play the slate. Because at least if people are playing correctly, right, the guys that I'm playing and the stacks that I'm playing should be super chalky. And so be it. That's just going to be the case this week. If it's not, if people are dumb, which they were for the Ryder Cup, the optimal strategy, particularly when you were trying not to play against players that you were using as a stack, people didn't pay attention to that. They just kind of like entered lineups freely by hand, weren't thinking about correlation whatsoever. So hopefully that's the case once again. But like I said, if people are playing correctly, the guys that we're taking should be chalk. And if they are, that's okay. They're the best plays for a reason. Let's talk about the guys here in the 8K range. So I think in terms of a really cheap captain, Jordan Spieth makes sense. I mentioned if I'm going to take the cheap guy at captain, I'm 100% going to take JT2. So that's going to be the quote unquote stack that I'm forcing into my lineups. In terms of another, set of guys on America, I'm not forcing in a stack here, but I don't hate the idea of trying to take this Max Homa group there with Tony Finau. I think that they might be a little bit lower owned. They're also a little bit lower priced, and that leaves you with 2 spots left. Now, a lot of people are probably going to go with a 4-2, which is taking 2 internationals here. So if you wanted to, you could take like a Tom Kim. You're left with $6,900. You could afford Corey Connors there. You could also not nearly afford Sungjae, but you could take Corey Connors there at $6,200 and round out a lineup. That's going to be extremely common, right? But what's not going to get played very often is adding in somebody like Cameron Young, right? Where you're taking 2 stacks from the American side, just a one-off and a Cam Young, and then 1 international player. This sort of lineup I like because it kind of differentiates yourself just based on your construction. And what we saw win all of the Ryder Cup GPPs was exactly this: a double stack for the American side, a one-off on America with a 1 buyback. So I like that a lot. If you wanted to go with a 4-2, I guess just run it back with 2 players from the international team. I don't think it has to be a stack. I talked about before how you don't have to play Decky and Adam Scott together, or Sungjae and Corey Connors. If you wanted to go with Decky and Corey Connors, that's fine, right? You can go with 2 players that aren't playing there on round 1, especially because you're hoping to avoid guys that are playing the stack that you're going against. Just to make sure. I think I did that with that lineup, but if I didn't, my lineup would catch me there. So let me go ahead and just put it in there to make sure. So we had JT and we had JT there. We had, who was our next stack? Yeah, Max Homa, Tony Finau. I know we had Tom Kim in there. Didn't put him at captain. That's my mistake there, boys. Captain, hit Jordan Spieth. All right, there we go. And then we had Cam Young. So with this, our stack, right, we had Tony Finau. We didn't have Pendrith or who's playing? There's Pendrith and Mito. Yes, we didn't have either of those 2, right? So we're good on that end, right? Our other stack is JT and Jordan, so playing in Im and Connors. And we didn't have either one there, right? We're playing Tom Kim as our one-off there. So this sort of lineup would check all of the stacking rules that I'm going with. I just wanted to make sure we're doing it. Again, I'm doing all of them on my optimizer, so I'm not going to have to do this by hand very often. But this is the sort of lineup that I'd be willing to enter here. Exactly this sort of lineup. So that's what we're thinking in terms of our hand builds. Going over the prize picks now, let's talk through this. So my favorite prop was 2.5 here with Colin Morikawa and Cam Young under. It's now at 2, which I think is still an okay prop. It's not nearly as advantageous as it was at 2.5 though. This Scheffler Burns, I actually took the over on there at 2.5. The JT Jordan prop, I took the over on. That's because I love those 2 players. In terms of giving advice though, I think it's a little bit closer. So I don't know if it's as big of a smash spot as you had with the other 2 props that I took. And the last prop was the Schauffele and Cantlay over. So I took their over against Hideki and Adam Scott. Hideki's dealing with the injury. Adam Scott is just old and crusty at this point. I expect that super team of Xander and Cantlay to go out there and smash. So just go out there, click them in for you so you guys can see what we're talking about here. So it's an over here, an over here, an under here, and an over on this Scotty Scheffler and Sam Burns prop. You could do it in a power play. I chose to do it as a flex. So I took just the 5x payout because it is a matchup. It's volatile to begin with. Don't be surprised if one of the matchup goes the other way. And this just gives us a little bit of insurance there. So that's what I'm thinking on that end, boys. Let's go ahead and catch up on any questions. It looks like we have one down there. And we'll wrap it up here. So Chris says the big GPP on DK is only a third full. People might be staying away from this weird format. What do you think? I think that sounds like overlay, that if you have the extra bankroll on DraftKings, might as well go and chase it. I'm going to check on the $5 GPP. If you're looking at a similar level of overlay, I might have to go ahead and pull the trigger because, my goal this week, right, is to just grind out ROI. I'm not obsessing over winning the big GPP this week, right? And if I'm going to win, I'm okay with it being split with like 20 to 30 other people. And if that's going to be my mindset, right, if I'm just going for pure ROI, obviously overlay would be an even better idea. So, hey, I'll have to take a good look at that, Chris. Thank you for mentioning that. I didn't really have that in mind. I entered my lineups like 2 days ago, got them reserved, and I guess there's just not that much enthusiasm behind it, which I understand, right? It's going to be a week for us golf hardos, us hardcore DFS fans, and I'm okay for it, right? Should be a profitable one, particularly if we get some of that overlay. But that's all I've got, fellas. We're not going to have Showdown this weekend. There shouldn't be any slates, which if they had it, trust me, I'd be bringing you Showdown content, but that will leave us a little bit more time to do NFL stuff. So there'll be main slate content. I'm going to do some primetime videos for the Sunday night game this time. So normally I just do Thursday and Monday. So I'll try to do a Sunday night game this week. And let's see, next week, I believe we're back to the PGA Tour. So looking forward to that. We'll have a full slate of content there. So I appreciate everybody stopping by. Best of luck with all of your lineups for this week. And let's get this cash.